She had a very deep,
Judge, I'm going to object at this point. She's calling to make conclusions that she doesn't have any foundation or we don't have any foundation to suggest she's qualified to make. And in addition, she's going to be reciting what another medical examiner may or may not have said.
All right, on lack of foundation, I'll sustain the objection.
Thank you, Your Honor. Ma'am, you mentioned that there was an autopsy performed.
yes,
Did you attend that autopsy?
yes,
Were you present for the beginning to end of the autopsy?
yes,
As you were there, were you standing there with the ME performing the autopsy?
yes,
Was the ME explaining as performing the autopsy what they were seeing?
yes,
As a 20-year veteran as an EMS, were you understanding the terms and things that were being explained to you in the
yes,
ME?
yes.
So then I'd like you to please go ahead with what you were explaining to us about.
Judge, and I'm going to renew my objection. At this point, it's relying on hearsay to make a determination of what someone else may have said about what they think they may or may not have found.
It's overruled.
Go ahead, please, ma'am.
Sorry, can you repeat that question?
I was asking you to please explain what you were observing during the autopsy that helped cause you to change your mind about the cause of death.
As they were dissecting the bruise, it was a very deep bruise on her arm. It didn't make sense that she had thrown up the night before because she still had stomach contents.
I pause you, please.
Yes.
Explain that to the jury, please.
So her stomach was full of food. If she threw up, there wouldn't be food in her stomach during the autopsy. I was going to say, so I'm the one that signs the death certificate. I'm the one that makes that determination. I do, if we do an autopsy on a body, I do take the medical examiner's words advice. I'm not a doctor, they're a doctor. When they do the autopsy, then it helps me figure out the cause of death.
You'd explained earlier that one of the bases for your original determination was seizures. What did you learn from the autopsy about that factor or that aspect of Tammy?
All of Tammy's organs were very healthy. There was nothing in the brain. The heart was healthy. The only organ that was not healthy were the lungs. When they were dissected, there was still foam, a lot of foam in the lungs.
How did that impact your decision to change the death certificate?
There shouldn't have been that foam in the lungs still. It was 2 months before she was exhumed and then autopsy was done.
Is there anything else besides the autopsy that has impacted your decision to change the amended death certificate?
Yes.
What other things?
I received a call from Arizona police. They wanted all of my coroner records. There had been a death in Arizona, and Chad's name was brought up. And there was also an attempt. And when I heard all those names and the investigation that was going on, and then it did change my mind. If I had known that information, it would have been
Who were
different.
the names that had been brought up?
Lori
Judge?
Ballo,
I'll withdraw. I'm sorry. I apologize.
Lori Ballo, Alex Cox, Chad Daybell.
You mentioned the word attempt. What did you mean by that?
an attempt for Lori's niece's husband, attempt a shooting.
At the time that you made your original determination, had you heard the name J.J. Vallow or Tylee Ryan?
No.
Did information related to those names also impact your decision to amend the death certificate?
Yes.
As you sit there today, do you have any regrets about your original decision?
Yes.
What are those regrets?
So, had I known that information, I would have ordered an autopsy. At that time, with my limited training and being new, I did the best I could with what training I had at that time.
Thank you, ma'am. Your Honor, I have no more questions at this time.
All right. Cross-examination.
Judge, before we start, I have exhibit 19 and 20. If I could provide those to the bailiff to have those marked. My understanding is 19 and 20 are admitted by way of stipulation of the parties.
Okay, have they? And what are those, Mr. Pryor?
Those are a death, 20 is a death certificate, 19 are pictures. And Judge, we'll have a sidebar prior to going forward with the pictures, if that's acceptable to the
All right,
board.
how many pictures have you got in?
It's going to be one. There are a number of pictures, A through I think K, but specifically it's going to be F that I think I'm going to be looking at. But I'll request a sidebar before we go down that road, Judge.
Okay,
Your Honor, for my benefit, could I just ask counsel to refresh me what these photos are of? Are they of Tammy's death scene?
Correct.
Thank you.
And Judge, there may be some overlap with what the state had admitted as well previously. So
sounds like we have a defense exhibit 20 that's already been admitted. Is that-
they may already be on there.
Okay, so the death certificate exhibit 20 has previously been admitted.
I didn't have a recollection of that, Judge. My notes didn't reflect that. I apologize.
All right, thank you. So you can, yeah, if you can start there, and when we get to the pictures, if we have exhibits not yet admitted, we'll take those up in turn.
All right. And Judge, whenever I can go forward.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Your Honor. Thank you. Thank you.
Do that.
So, and how would you like me to address you? Miss Dye or Coroner Dye? Miss Dye is okay?
That-
Okay.
okay.
Miss Dye, you had an occasion to discuss this case with the FBI. Do you recall that?
Yes,
And that discussion took place at the Rexburg Police Department?
yes,
Okay. And as part of that discussion with the FBI, you had mentioned that you had worked for EMS for 20 years,
yes.
that you were an EMT for 5 years and an advanced EMT for 15. Is that still accurate?
That was in 2019, so
You have even more experience now.
I have more experience now, yes.
So when you're talking about an EMT and an advanced EMT, an advanced EMT is someone who is qualified to give medication. Is that right?
Certain medication, yes.
And there's also additional training as well, identifying medical emergencies. But in addition, there's also some training as it relates to death scene investigation. Is there not?
Yes,
And for 20 years, you had experience doing that, right?
My main concern as an EMT is to save lives.
I understand that, but if the life can't be saved, you're still as an EMT for 20 years, given a significant amount of training about the death scene investigation, are you not?
If we can't save the patient before I was coroner, then no, I didn't. We would leave the scene.
Okay. Now, when you spoke with the FBI, your testimony with the prosecuting attorney is you said something about taking a 2-day seminar, is that right? Some sort of
In
2-day training?
Boise, in Boise, yes.
And then you said there was some other classes or some other issues, right? That you
Uh,
took?
There's a week-long conference and it's about 4 days, but yes, it's a week long
Yeah.
in Las Vegas, Nevada.
And that's
every
what I was
year.
curious about, because you mentioned something about something else, but when you talked to the FBI, you described it as a week-long conference with the FBI as part of your training, right?
Right?
Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. And what areas did that cover as part of that week-long conference?
Um, Causes of death, times of death. Um, it covers a wide variety.
It's an extensive course.
Yes, it was my first time attending too.
And is it required as part of being a coroner? Isn't that one of the requirements that you have to go through that training in order to be either elected or appointed as a coroner of a county?
Yes,
And you have to get this extensive training because we're not dealing with a minor issue. We're dealing with making a significant determination of the cause of death of somebody, aren't we? Ma'am?
yes,
Okay. And are you familiar with Title 19, Chapter 43 of the Idaho Code?
I don't recall.
Judge, would there be something that could refresh your recollection if I showed you something?
Sure. Yes.
And if you would be so kind as to just read that, I'm not having it marked, just read right there. You could read that, take the time to read that, and then when you're done, hand it back to the bailiff, and then we'll talk a little bit about it.
What statute are you having her review, Mr. Pryor?
1943-01, Judge. I have another copy. If I would like, I could provide it to the court.
Fine, I have it.
Thank you. Now, you've read Title 19, Chapter 43 of 01 of the Idaho Code. Is that?
Objection, Your Honor.
Grounds.
Your Honor, this witness is not qualified to give she has no legal expertise to be interpreting statutes for the jury.
Well, if it calls for a legal conclusion, I'll sustain it, but I don't know what the question is yet, so overruled for now.
Now, ma'am, did you have an occasion to read that as part of your responsibilities of becoming a coroner?
When I first took over as coroner, yes.
Right. So you're aware that your primary job as a coroner under this particular legal statute of the law is when a county coroner is informed that
Objection, Your Honor. This is calling for a legal conclusion.
it's not, Judge.
Overruled.
When a county coroner is informed that a person has died, the county coroner shall investigate the death. You read that first line, right? And you're aware of that, right?
Yes,
You are under a legal obligation under the law as part of your position to investigate any death, correct?
yes,
And if that death was suspicious or unknown circumstances, that's sub B, or the death occurred as a result of violence, whether by homicide, suicide, accident, you are required to investigate, correct?
correct.
Okay. And then as a result, if you determine that there's an issue, you can require an inquest to be conducted, which is basically like a jury trial, right? You understand that?
Yes,
Okay. And you are also to notify the police if you have any, before even doing an inquest, if you have any concerns under the statute that there's anything suspicious or out of the ordinary, you are to notify the police department and ask them to conduct an investigation. You understand that as well?
yes. And we did have an officer on scene that helped investigate this. And we have an officer respond to every death call that helps investigate.
And I appreciate that, ma'am. But in talking to the prosecutor, you talked about, well, the lapidity caused me some concern. Remember you said that about lapidity, that was a concern of yours and your questions weren't answered, right? Well, at the time of the scene there, you said, you noticed lapidity in the body, that Tammy Daybell apparently had died on her back, right?
Right.
Okay.
Yes.
Was that of a concern of yours at the time that would cause you to say, maybe I ought to take a step back before I sign this death certificate?
At that time, no.
Okay, but you were fully aware of the lapidity that you're claiming had occurred at that point. Is that right?
Yes,
Okay. There were no fresh bruises on Tammy Daybell's body anywhere, were there?
on her arm. Yes.
Those were fresh bruises?
I don't know. I'm not qualified to
Well, you did
take that.
you did a report in that regard, did you not?
I did, and it looked like an old bruise to me. And with,
That's, we'll get to that.
okay,
So when you filled out your medical report, you specifically not only identified that she had bruises on her arm, you actually used the word old bruises. Do you remember that?
yes, I did.
Okay. And these were not fresh or red or irritated or anything like that, correct?
Objection, Your Honor. The witness has already indicated she's not qualified to determine that.
Well, based on our observations all over,
These weren't fresh bruises, were they, on her arms? These were old bruises, just like what your report says, correct?
I can't answer that.
Okay. But you will answer that on your report, when you decided to fill out a report relating to this case, that report said old bruises. When the picture of the body, you wrote on the arms, old bruises on the arms, right?
Yes,
No other bruises on her body anywhere else, right?
no,
Nothing else that would deem to be suspicious on her body, correct?
no,
And in fact, there was no indication of any trauma to the neck that you could observe, right?
no,
There were no scratch marks on her hands that would indicate any kind of a struggle, correct?
no,
There was no irritation on her ears or her face or her head that would give you any indication that there was any kind of a struggle. Is that right?
yes,
When you arrived, Chad Daybell was distraught, wasn't he?
yes,
Sobbing.
yes,
And you noted that it was his son that was not upset. His son was, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but would you say his son was reserved,
yes,
quiet?
yes,
And in the FBI report, you mentioned that you think that maybe his son was in shock. Remember that?
yes,
Okay. And it's still your assessment at this point that at the time you felt that his son Garth was in shock. Is that right?
yes,
Okay. You went over to the nightstand And on Tammy's side of the bed, you found the essential oils, right?
The book,
The what?
the book
The book.
of essential oils of natural.
Did you see any, I would represent you that Officer Greenell testified that she found a number of items in the bedroom. And you also saw cough medicine on Tammy's side. Is that right?
I don't recall the cough medicine being in the bedroom.
Okay, what about the medication for strike? What about the medication for bruises that she had, that was in the bedroom as well? Do you recall that?
No,
Okay, but if Officer Greenell was there, right?
yes, she
And
was.
detailed that in her report, correct? Correct?
I don't recall.
Okay, would it help you to review Officer Greenell's report?
Yes,
Judge, if I could just have a moment.
You may.
And Judge, I think while I'm waiting for this to load, I'll continue with some questions so we don't waste any time. If it loads. So back to, I think where we left off is that Garth was, in your opinion, was in shock at the death of his mother, correct?
correct.
And Chad Daybell throughout this episode of being there with Tammy, for the most part, was sobbing and was highly emotional almost the entire time. Is that fair?
Yes,
There was no instance where you saw that he was faking it or trying to pretend to be upset. This was a genuine situation where you truly believed he was upset about the death of his wife. Is that right?
Objection, speculation, Your Honor.
Overruled.
You can answer.
yes,
Now, I appreciate you talking about it, and you mentioned it in the report, that at no time did the family ever try to prevent you from doing an autopsy in this case. Is that right?
Emma stated she didn't want one done, but
Okay.
it's my choice, ultimately my
Right.
choice. Yes,
Emma didn't want one done because she didn't want her mother cut up, right?
correct. Yes,
She didn't want her mother subjected to she didn't want her mother treated that way as part of the examination. Is that what her primary and only concern was?
yes,
Okay. And yet Chad was indifferent one way or the other. He didn't tell you one way or the other whether he wanted one or didn't want one. Isn't that true?
yes,
And ultimately, it's not the family's decision whether this occurs. It's your decision whether this occurs. Is that right?
yes,
And based on the facts as you saw them, you saw some old bruises that you identified in your report, right? Correct?
bruises.
There were no other indications of a struggle or a fight as it related to Tammy Daybell's body. Is that right?
No, not that I noticed. No,
Okay. No other indication right up to the time you dropped her off at the morgue that there was any problem with Tammy's body in any way, correct?
explain problem.
Well, you didn't see anything as part of when you arrived to the time that you loaded her up and took her off to the morgue, there was never anything during that process that would indicate there was anything wrong with Tammy Daybell's body, right?
I don't know what you're asking me.
Okay.
I can't answer that question.
Okay, how about this? There's nothing suspicious that you noted other than the lapidity and the old bruises that you put in your medical report, correct?
Correct.
Judge, at this point, I've got the report of his Officer Greenow. With the court's permission, I could give it to the bailiff. He could take it to her and she could scroll through. I think that would protect in terms of being able to refresh her recollection about the report, if that's acceptable to the court.
All right, I'll let the prosecutor take a look at that first before it goes to the witness to make sure it's appropriately identified.
Oh, it's okay. See, and then it has. And I could have printed it off. I just-
Mr. Pryor, we've got that report also admitted as an exhibit, if that's
But I
easier.
was also, maybe I missed it, but I didn't have that marked down, and if the court wants to, I don't, either way, Judge, either we can,
I'd prefer the exhibit to your computer.
all right.
States Exhibit 418.
It doesn't work that way. I'm an idiot when it comes to electronics. Oh, thank you. And ma'am, after you've had a chance to review that, would you look up and then just hand that back to the bailiff?
Your Honor, while the witness is reviewing, may we have a quick sidebar?
Well, let's have the witness finish the review and then we'll have a quick sidebar.
Yeah. Got it under, I have it under, I think 19 or one of these I have it under, and I'm gonna move to admit the entire explanation. Yeah. I think the whole thing is. No, there's like 4 pages there in the whole thing, so. Yeah, oh no, that's okay. We can just correct that. I don't have a problem with that. And if you want stipulation, do you want to read over this so you know what's in the whole thing? Well, no, just use the up and down thing and you can start and
Okay, in her,
get it back to the bailiff. And Judge, for counsel, may I have a look at that, Mr. Bailiff, please?
Yeah, and that's Exhibit 418 that council's reviewing.
You're right. It's only 2. Judge, we may have to have a sidebar just very briefly. Would that be possible?
Yes, that's fine.
Want to look at the rest of it or? Okay. Okay.
All right, so after a sidebar, we've determined we do need to take a little bit of time to get an exhibit prepared, which we're working on at this time. And we will take the mid-morning recess to allow that to occur while we're on break. So we'll take our break here, plan on a 30-minute break to come back on at 10:15.
All right, please.
Thank you. Please be seated. All right, we can have the drop back, please. Thank you. Please be seated. All right, we're back on the record. CR 22211623, State of Idaho versus Chad Daybell. Completed our morning break. Maybe to help move things forward here, Mr. Pryor, I'll note that we have now Defendant's Exhibit 19, which is the entire report of Officer Greenhalgh, including attached photographs. And I believe that's been offered and will be admitted by stipulation. Is that your understanding?
It is, Judge, and that's 19. Is that right, Judge?
Yes.
Thank you.
Mr. Wixom from the state, does the state stipulate to the admission of Exhibit 19, which is the entire report, including statements and photographs?
We do, Your Honor.
Okay, that'll be admitted then as a single exhibit. And you can proceed with your continuing cross, Mr. Pryor.
Now, Ms. Dye, as part of your activities on the scene at Miss Daybell's death, you eventually went back and did a chart or a report as it related to this case. Do you recall that? And part of that is to do a body chart and identify things of significance on that body chart. Is that right?
Yes,
Okay, and you in fact did that. Did you recall that?
yes.
If I were to provide you with a copy of the chart, would you recognize that chart? If I could have the bailiff approach the witness? Thank you, sir. Thank you. Oh, I'm sorry. I thought I showed it to you already. And do you recognize those documents?
Mhm.
Are those the documents that you prepared after your examination of Tammy Daybell?
Yes,
And the date of those are 10/20 of 14, is that right?
yes, that's the date the report was
Okay.
completed.
And those are true and accurate copies of what you prepared as a result of your examination of Tammy Daybell on the date of her death. Is that correct?
Yes,
Okay, Judge, I'm going to move for admission of defendant's exhibit, and I would like it to be marked E and F, Judge. I think it's consistent with A, B, and C.
E and F,
E and F, 89 E and F.
89 E and F.
Yes, Judge. And I think that was how it was previously disclosed to the state on my exhibits.
Any objection to exhibits 89 E and F?
No, Your Honor.
All right. Defense exhibits 89 E and 89 F are admitted. And again, two separate exhibits there, Mr. Pryor. It's a body chart in that
Two body charts, Judge.
two body charts. Thank
Do
you.
you want to have that marked now, Judge, or how do you want to handle that?
I'll grab him.
I'll have the clerk mark that actually, so we keep it straight.
You're getting your mileage in today. Sorry. You're walking today.
So to be clear then, Mr. Pryor, the top, there's two pages here. The top page you gave me will be E and the bottom page will be F.
Yes, Judge.
Okay.
Now, ma'am, you've had may I proceed, Judge?
You may.
You've had a chance to look at what's been marked Exhibit 89E and 89F. Is that correct?
Yes.
And based on the time that you spent at Mr. Daybell's residence observing Tammy, this is a true and accurate reflection of what you observed on that day, correct?
Correct.
And at this point, there's no changes that you would make or anything that you would modify in regards to this, correct?
Correct.
Okay, Judge, could I publish this?
Yes. There's a light on that device, Mr. Pryor, that'll help with the shadow.
Thank you. Okay. So and let me know when you're ready, ma'am.
Yeah, go ahead.
On your left, when you're looking at the screen, and it's the face down figure, up on the arm, we have a term. What is that term?
Lividity.
And blood had gathered there. Is that right? That's what that means?
Yes.
Okay, and then a little further to the right on the same figure, there's another word what is that word?
Lividity.
And then to the left again on the same figure down near the lower part of the back, there's another word.
Lividity.
And then down on the legs, there's another term. What's that term?
Lividity.
So from what I gather from this, there was lividity on her entire body. Would that be fair?
Yes.
Okay. So we weren't able with lividity, you aren't able to really make a determination other than the fact that she was laying flat at some point, right?
Yes.
Or she was laying on her front, one way or the other, right?
On her back.
Okay. So in your report, when you discussed this with the FBI, you had, based on all of your experience, you had said that the body had been dead for about 5 to 6 hours. Do you recall telling the FBI that?
Approximately, yes.
Okay, well, you said 5 to 6 hours. So that's what you testified to the FBI. Is that incorrect?
No.
Okay. So I guess the question is that Mr. Daybell mentioned that he was awoken by the fact that Tammy had slipped out of the bed when he pulled the covers. You recall that?
Yes.
And Tammy had fallen down and her head was on the floor and her leg was up on the bed. You recall that?
That's what I was told. Yes.
Okay. So if Tammy had died in the bed and had passed away in the bed, this lividity would be consistent with her dying in bed on her back, right?
Yes.
And if she fell down, and that's what woke Mr. Daybell up, there wouldn't be lividity up in her head, would there?
No.
So when Mr. Daybell told you that he was awoken when he pulled the covers, rolled over, and Tammy slid off the bed, well, that's consistent with the lividity here. She was in bed. She died in bed. And when he pulled the covers, she slid off. So wouldn't his story be consistent with the lividity findings that she actually was in bed for 5 or 6 hours?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Now I want to go over to the other side and the one that's facing. And on that particular one, it says something about tinged foam. Could you read that for me?
Blood tinged foam.
Okay, and that's what you observed on her body was and we saw the pictures of the blood tinged foam in her mouth, correct?
Yes.
Okay, and then further down on what would be her right arm, you put two words there. And what are those words?
Old bruising. Old bruising.
Okay, so old bruising. Now, you didn't put new bruising, did you?
No,
You didn't put any marks on anywhere else on her body, right?
no.
And as part of your investigation, you by statute are required to do a thorough investigation of the body. Is that right?
Yes.
And you did that day, didn't you?
Yes.
And what you came up with is that she had some foam in her mouth and there were some old bruises on her right arm. That's what you came up with, right?
Yes.
And you came up with nothing else on her body that showed any indication of any other trauma, marks?
No.
We can take that one down. I'm done with that. And Judge, at this time, I'm going to want to publish defense, it's Defense Exhibit 19, I believe.
All right. Give me a moment.
19F, Judge, I'm sorry. And Judge, this is the one where we counsel.
Sorry.
This is just.
Mr. Bailiff, would,
I'll clarify that one here, just mark that whole. All right, again, Mr. Pryor, the way we're admitting and have admitted Exhibit 19 is just a single exhibit. So you can reference photographs contained within 19. They're not going to be given separate designations. So 19F is not going to be an exhibit. So you'll have to refer to it by, I guess, page number, because that's the way it came in as one document. We're not going to have the sub documents in 19. It's just one exhibit.
and Judge, unfortunately, there are not page numbers on these.
Okay, well, if you,
I can identify it as,
you can describe it or count through the pages, but
Okay.
it's one single exhibit.
and Judge, this page number is a photo of Tammy Daybell's right arm showing some discoloration.
Okay, and we've got the original exhibit here that's getting processed. We'll get that over to you here shortly. And you can publish off that courts.
Judge, I've also got it on my screen. Could we do that by HDMI?
You could do that as well if that's a
So would
accurate.
you approach and look at this to see that it's a true and accurate same one, right? Judge, counsel has acknowledged it's the same picture.
Okay, as long as it corresponds with the actual exhibit, Exhibit 19 is admitted. It's the paper document of the entire report with the pictures. If you want to select one of the pictures to publish, we'll do that. I understand this is also a photograph, death scene photograph. The court's not going to publish to the public. It's going to be published to the jurors and the parties only based on a graphic content.
Your Honor, may I have permission to stand here during this part of the cross-examination so I can have a vantage point for the screen?
You may.
Oh, it's up there. The magic. So ma'am, you're looking at what's part of 19, Exhibit 19. Do you recognize that?
Yes,
And the old bruises that you were talking about, are those reflected on the two what look to be discolored marks on Tammy Daybell's arm?
yes,
And that's what you saw on that day, correct?
yes,
And those are the old bruises that you talked about that you identified on her body on that day, correct?
yes.
Okay, Judge, that's all I have at this point with this.
All right.
So you testified earlier and you used the words, if I don't deem it necessary. If I don't deem it necessary that an autopsy is done, it's my decision alone to decide whether an autopsy is done, correct?
Um,
Your decision alone to decide whether an autopsy is done, correct?
it's ultimately my decision.
Right.
Yes.
And you looked at these old bruises that you identified, correct?
Yes,
Correct?
yes,
And you looked at the foam coming from the mouth, right?
yes,
Okay. And I didn't see any other marks or any other indication of anything other than the lividity that you talked about, correct?
correct.
And based on that, you then issued a death certificate, right?
Yes,
Now, before you issue a death certificate, you have an obligation, do you not? Before you issue and sign that death certificate? Are you aware of your obligation?
yes,
Okay, and that obligation is that you want to attest, but when you put your signature down on that death certificate, you want to be sure that what you're signing is true and accurate to the best of your ability based on the information you have at the time of the death. Is that fair?
yes,
Okay. And at that point, the death certificate, and Judge, um, I'm not going to publish Exhibit 20, but Exhibit 20 reflects that death certificate. You talked about pulmonary edema, and then there was another cause for this, right? Another reason why you cited her, two things that you cited as part of what you felt was her death, correct?
yes,
Okay. Now, you did talk to Chad, and he talked to you about the fact that um, Tammany vomited the night before, correct?
yes.
And you had mentioned about the stomach. Was that stomach completely full?
No, not completely.
Right. And were you aware, when you were there, did you talk to Garth about the fact that he bought Tammy a quarter pounder and some French fries that night? Did you discuss that with Garth?
No,
Okay. But when you went through the autopsy, you found potatoes in her stomach, right?
I didn't identify it.
Okay.
I just saw the stomach contents.
Okay, but you weren't able to identify that there were potatoes in her stomach.
I didn't know what it was.
And you didn't identify the fact that there was any sight of a quarter pounder or anything like that, correct?
No,
Okay. So when you said that you found it unusual that her stomach was full, it wasn't really full. It just had contents in it. Is that fair?
yes,
Okay. So we really don't know whether Tammy Daybell threw up that night, other than the fact that Chad said she did, right?
right,
And when you showed up, Chad Daybell is sobbing, he's crying, and he's telling you how his wife threw up the night before, correct?
yes,
Went to sleep, and she fell off the bed. And based on the lividity, his story is consistent with what the lividity findings you had, right?
yes,
Okay. Now, you also had an opportunity to look at Officer Greenall's report, correct?
yes,
And you saw that the number of medications that Tammy Daybell was taking, correct?
uh,
Do I need to refresh
Yeah.
your recollection with it again? Do you need to
no,
see it again?
I saw it.
You saw it? You sure?
Yes,
So on page 1 of Officer Greenall's report, and the comment was that they're on the table every morning and she takes them to help her. You recall seeing that in Officer Greenow's report?
Yes,
And you discussed that with Officer Greenow, right? You discussed what Tammy Daybell was taking as part of your investigation, didn't you?
yes,
Okay, so you're aware that she was taking fluoxetine, thank you. Fluoxetine, which is Prozac.
yes,
She was taking acetaminophen. She was taking ibuprofen, right? Vitality extracts, immunity energy, grapefruit, peppermint. I'm sorry, and I apologize. Vitality extracts for immunity, energy, grapefruit, and peppermint. You saw that as well, right? On the table, right?
I recall it was in the cupboard,
Right. You recall that was in the cupboard? That
the
wasn't on the
kitchen.
table?
not the bedside table, the kitchen cupboard.
Well, when Officer Greenow says Chad showed me all of the over-counter medicines she takes, she said she has approximately 10 bottles on the table every morning. So would you be mistaken possibly that Officer Greenow must have made a mistake in her report, or do you possibly, you just don't recall correctly?
Doesn't it say in her report, the cupboard?
Oh, it talks about what was in the cupboard and that
Yes.
there were other things in the cupboard in addition to these things. But Officer Greenow talks about this being on the table. You don't remember that?
There's a picture of those medications in the cupboard in the kitchen.
Okay. And then equate cough medicine, right?
Yes,
Essential oil respiratory blend, right?
yes,
And then lastly, supplement for bruising and sore muscles. Remember that as well?
yes,
And then there is a reference that most of what was in the cupboard were essential oils, natural remedies, and some pain medication. Okay?
yes,
So this cupboard was full of a number of essential oils, right?
yes,
This cupboard was full of natural remedies, correct?
yes,
And this cupboard was included in all of these things as well. A lot of medicine that she was taking, right?
natural, yes,
And there's no doubt in your mind that Tammy Daybell was the one taking all of these medications, right?
that's what we were told, yes.
Okay. And Chad talked to you about Tammy having minor fits and shaking consistent with fatigue, right?
Consistent with
Minor fits. that were
syncopal
consi-
episodes.
She had,
Yeah, Mr. Pryor, please let her finish her answer before you get another question going.
want me to restate?
Yes, please.
You were told that Tamra would have minor fits of shaking, which were consistent with seizures, correct?
Yes,
Now, when you have a seizure, you're aware that you don't need to have a heart condition or a problem with your organs in order to have a seizure, right?
it's in the brain.
Okay. But what in the brain is the seizure? It doesn't necessarily mean you have a sign of it in your brain, do you?
I'm not a doctor, so I don't.
Okay. But you made an assessment here based on what you said, and you signed a death certificate saying that this was something other than homicide or murder, didn't you?
Initially, yes,
Okay. And then her daughter Emma talked about her mother was trying to take clogging classes, but then in the last month or so wasn't able to keep up and was having some difficulty as well, correct?
yes,
Okay. And there was some discussion that Chad was in the temple, and that's part of his faith. I guess we previously talked about a temple, and that's somewhere, I guess, where you practice your religious faith.
yes,
And during that time while in the temple, she fainted while she was kneeling down, right?
yes, when she went to stand up, yes.
Right. And there were other instances where she was having health issues and balance problems as well that were vaguely referenced in the report, right?
Yes,
So based on the fact that she had seizures, based on the fact that those bruises were nothing new or recent, there was nothing on her neck or face that indicated that she was smothered, choked, or anything like that, you made the determination that there was a medical reason for why she passed away, correct?
Yes,
Now, that all changed though, right?
yes,
And then at some point, you received a call from some police officers in Arizona, right?
yes,
And they said, hey, we got this situation with Lori Vallow, right?
yes,
And we got another situation with Lori Vallow and Alex Cox related to the name Brandon Boudreaux, right?
yes,
And the first situation was with Charles Vallow, right?
yes.
Did that officer happen to tell you at that time that Chad Daybell isn't implicated or involved in any criminal proceeding um, against either of those folks? Was that told to you at that time?
That, yes, Chad Daybell's name was mentioned with Lori Vallow.
Yeah, but did they happen to tell you that they're not pursuing any charges against Mr. Daybell at that point?
No,
Okay, so that was left out when they talked to you about looking into this thing, right?
yes,
And then at that point, based on your previous observation of foam in the mouth, right?
yes,
And the lividity, right?
yes,
And what those police officers told you when you had your discussion with them, right?
yes,
At that point, you decided maybe I need to look into this thing a little more, right?
yes,
And at that point, you helped with the officers getting an order to exhume Tammy Daybell's body.
yes.
Did you start an inquest per statute into this matter?
I, 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 I can't answer that.
Well, you can, because did you start an inquest? You read the statute. If there's an allegation someone has been murdered, homicide, suicide, you have the option to start a public inquest.
Hold on before you answer. Grounds.
Council should not be interpreting the law at this point, and I don't know if she's able to draw the legal conclusion.
It's a yes or no question, but to the extent it's calling for any legal conclusion, it's sustained.
Okay, well, yes or no? Did you start an inquest?
No. No,
Instead, what you did is you started working with the police officers and the prosecuting attorney on it.
Objection argumentative.
Sustained.
At this point, you then notified the police that you wanted her body dug up, right?
at that point, we were working with the FBI and
Okay.
police from different locations,
Oh,
yes.
so the FBI was involved as well, right?
Yes, I
Okay.
believe so.
And at that point, there was an order to have Tammy's body removed from the ground, right?
Yes,
Now, as part of your your duties as a coroner, isn't it true that you're also supposed to notify families in regards to any death or suspicious death and let them know what's proceeding in these matters?
I believe that was done.
It was done?
I believe it was.
Do you know what family members they happened to mention that to, that they were digging their mother out of the ground?
I don't recall which ones, no.
Okay. And it was your duty to do that, so you don't recall your duty of having to notify them that they're digging their mother out of the ground, right?
I work closely with the investigators
Okay.
through the sheriff's office, our detectives, and
And I didn't ask you about what you did with the investigators, ma'am. I asked you whether you told the family you were digging their mother out of the ground.
no,
Was there any other reason you were looking for what, a reason for why Tammy Daybell could have died other than what you said about the lividity or anything else? Was there any other thing, other suspicious circumstances you were looking for?
at the time of her death, no,
And at the time of digging her up, were you looking for something else?
yes.
What were you looking for?
Suspicious activity, anything that would result in homicide.
Okay, and that was after talking to the police, you were looking for information that would help maybe convince you to change your report to something other than natural causes. Is that right?
After several things happened, yes.
Well, I'm not talking about I'm not talking about Brandon Boudreaux or Charles Vallow. We've already established what that's all about. I'm talking about the facts you had when Tammy Daybell was put in the ground. It was lividity, and that really was it, wasn't it?
No, I was told about her past health history,
Okay.
and that played into her cause of death. Yes,
Did you happen to look on Teton Medical Report and see what her past medical history was?
I did review it.
Okay.
Yes.
So then you're real well aware that Tammy Daybell had a history of anemia, right?
Past history, not current.
Right. Well, she wasn't treated, she wasn't being treated because she wouldn't go to the doctor for anemia. You didn't see any indication that she had been cured of anemia, right?
It just stated her past medical
Right.
history.
And based on your information, there's no indication in any single medical report that, amazingly, Tammy Daybell has been cured of her anemia, right?
No,
Okay. You also saw that she had a family history of heart disease and heart problems as well, right?
family history. Yes.
Yeah, family history, right?
Yes. Yes.
And you're also aware that Tammy Daybell had a difficulty with going and seeing doctors, correct? She didn't like to see doctors, did she?
Correct.
In fact, she relied on homeopathic essential oils and minerals to solve her medical maladies, right?
That's what I was told. Yes.
Right. Okay. So based on the other information that you had about Tammy's history, you decided that even though there was anemia and there's a past history of heart disease and heart issues in the family, we were still going to dig her up, right?
Yes.
And
Yes.
would you agree with me, ma'am? You were basically going on a fishing expedition looking for a reason to change.
Objection, argumentative, Your Honor.
Sustained.
You were basically looking for some reason to dig Tammy up and try to come up with another cause of death, right?
Objection again, argumentative, Your Honor.
Sustained. Ask a question, please, Mr. Pryor.
After she was dug up and you went into the and had the autopsy done, right? By the way, where was that autopsy done?
In Utah.
Where in Utah?
I don't recall exactly
Okay.
where we were.
But you were in Utah somewhere, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Judge, if I could just have a minute.
You may.
That's all I have.
All right, Mr. Wixom, redirect.
If I may, Your Honor.
Mr. Bailiff?
And do you recall being asked several questions about what your legal responsibilities are as a coroner by the defense counsel?
Yes.
With respect to your duty to perform an investigation, will you please recount what steps you took in your investigation originally at the time of death?
I asked for medical history for Tammy, looked for medications. We also looked in the bedroom, in the nightstand drawers, for anything that would be suspicious. And then Officer Greenhalgh and myself And Deputy Wilmore also spoke with two of our detectives. And Officer Greenhalgh was told just to take some good pictures and document well.
And in fact, pictures were taken. Is that correct?
Yes,
Were you present when those pictures were taken?
yes,
Did you provide any instruction as a coroner as to what pictures to take or how to take them?
yes.
Do you recall anything else you did as part of your investigation? Let me ask this. Did you attempt to talk to Garth about the circumstances of his mother's death?
I mostly just talked to Chad and Emma. At the time, Garth was just very quiet and just would nod when we would ask him questions or when Chad would respond. He was just really quiet.
And with respect to a number of the questions, you
Mhm.
you continued to tell the jury, that's what I was told. Do you remember responding in that manner?
Yes,
Who was the person on scene that was primarily providing you with all the information that you were relying upon?
Chad Daybell.
And at the time, did Chad bring up any issues about his connection to Lori Vallow?
No,
Did he bring up Alex Cox's name?
no,
Did he bring up the attempted shooting of Brandon Boudreaux?
no.
Defense counsel made clear that you had estimated an approximate time of death, roughly 5 to 6 hours before you arrived on scene. Is that fair?
Yes,
Likewise, you were asked questions about finding a number of supplements and other over-the-counter prescriptions on scene.
yes.
Was it even possible for you to ascertain how long those items had been on scene before you got there?
No.
Did you get any other information from Chad to verify that in fact she was taking those supplements and they had been on scene prior to her passing?
I did not.
Do you think it's possible that someone else could have put those supplements on scene before you arrived?
They could have, yes.
You were asked about your duties to provide an accurate death certificate.
Yes,
And in fact, you did file an original death certificate and then a second amended certificate.
yes, correct.
Why did you file the second amended certificate?
The results of the autopsy and two other dead children at the same residence.
What other dead children are you referring to?
JJ and Tylee.
Did Chad volunteer any information about those two at
No.
the time?
No,
When you filed the amended certificate, were you doing that as part of your duty as a coroner?
yes, I was.
And explain that. Why? How is that a fulfillment of your duty?
That was the conclusion of the investigation.
You were asked several questions about the bruising that was observed on Tammy's arm.
Yes,
Do you have any qualification as you sit there today to determine the age of bruising?
it looked old to me, but I don't have the expertise.
And in fact, during the autopsy that you observed, did the ME provide any information about that?
Judge, I'm calls for medical conclusion, calls for hearsay, and there's a lack of foundation.
Sustained.
But as you sit there, do you have any reason to think you have the ability to say whether they were old bruises or fresh bruises, you personally?
Me personally, no.
You were asked some questions about your duty to inform family if you feel like there might need to be further investigation and an exhumation. Do you remember that question?
Yes.
And why didn't you do that?
I don't recall. I don't.
Do you remember what you told the defense attorney a few moments ago?
Our detectives and officers, I believe they informed the family.
So that was your understanding at the time.
That was my understanding, yes.
Were you ever given any information from law enforcement about how cooperative the family was during the course of the investigation?
Judge, objection.
I just asked this to
Basing
be,
They're basing the response on hearsay, and the only way they get that is through hearsay, Judge.
Yeah, the question was she given information? It's eliciting hearsay, Mr. Wixom, it's sustained.
may I argue on that, Judge?
No, I made the ruling, so ask another question.
You indicated that while you were on scene, I think your words were that Chad was sobbing and crying.
Yes.
And is it fair to say that different people have different emotions when there
Yes.
is a grief situation? Were you able to observe or get any information about whether or not a few weeks later when Chad was marrying Lori Vallow, if he was
Judge,
crying or sobbing?
objection, relevance.
Sustained.
Is it fair to say that when you were asking these questions on scene about Tammy's health, that Garth didn't give you any information about her health?
No, he didn't. Only that he was sharing her fluoxetine prescription with his mom.
And again, you've already testified about the reasons for your change in the admitted certificate.
Yes.
And that was based upon you being at the autopsy.
Judge asked and answered.
I'm just,
Overruled. Go ahead.
you already explained you attended the autopsy.
Yes, I did.
Is there anything else as you sit there today that you can explain to the jury that you learned from that autopsy experience that helped support your decision to change the death certificate?
The expertise of the medical examiner. And the investigation that was going on. Into other deaths and
Anything further? Anything else? Your Honor, I don't have any further questions.
Judge, there were some new subjects brought up about Alex Cox, Lori Vallow, as well as supplements on the scene and that when those arrived. I think I ought to be allowed to at least inquire on those two subjects.
On the supplements on the scene, I'll allow that. On the other topics, I think that was within the scope
Okay.
of cross. So just on that limited point made by redirect on the supplements, you can recross.
Ma'am, do you recall about what time the call was made, the 911 call was made?
I don't recall the exact time it was made, no.
But you did say that you dispatched your deputy coroner, Tammy Wilmore, to be there because she could have gotten there within 10 minutes, right?
Correct, yes.
And the purpose for that is that she lives, we're not going to say the town, but she lives close by this residence
Yes.
and she could get there relatively quickly, correct?
Quicker than me, yes.
So when the dispatch 911 call was made, Miss Wilmore was there within 10 minutes, right?
She was in bed when it happened, so probably not 10 minutes. She had to get dressed and gather her stuff and respond to the scene. Yes.
But you were there within 20 minutes and she
I-
arrived before you got there.
I said approximately.
Yeah. So prosecuting attorneys suggesting that someone ran out and bought a bunch of supplements, staged this thing, and within 10 minutes of Miss Wilmore arriving, planted all of this evidence. That isn't very realistic, is it?
Could have happened before,
Okay. All right. Fair
days
enough.
before.
Fair enough. Thank you, Judge. Nothing else.
All right. That concludes the testimony then of Coroner Dye. Is the state seeking to recall the witness in the future? From the defense?
And Judge, Miss Dye is under subpoena from my office, but I'm releasing her from that subpoena today.
Okay, so that does conclude your testimony for the trial. You can be excused. Thank you for appearing. You can go ahead and step down from the witness box and we'll gather anything that was there in way of exhibits. All right, the state may call its next witness.
Judge, at this time, the state would call Kelsey Harris.
Confirm the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
All right, the court will note the witness is now under oath. I do have a few questions before we start with the examination. Ms. Harris, have you viewed, watched online, or observed any of the trial testimony that's taken place since this case started?
No, I have not.
All right, have you talked to anyone else about the testimony they've given in trial?
No.
Okay. Mr. Wixom, you can proceed with your direct examination.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning, ma'am. Will you please state your full name for the record?
Kelsey Harris,
Will you please spell it for the reporter?
Kelsie Harris,
And where do you live?
Sugar City.
Is that here in Idaho?
Yes.
Ma'am, do you recall knowing a Tammy Daybell?
Yes.
I want to draw your attention back to October of 2019. Did you have any association or interaction with Ms. Daybell back then?
Yes.
What was that association?
She was a student in my clogging class in Sugar City, and she also worked at the school as a librarian. And at the time, I worked at the school as well.
What did you do at the school at the time?
I worked in the kitchen.
Did you have regular contact while at work with Ms. Daybell?
Yes, I saw her frequently.
Would you, how often during the course of a week or a day might you have? contact?
Every day I would see her.
How would you generally describe your relationship with her?
We were friends. We would see each other at class, in my class and at the school and have conversation more than just a hello.
Okay. And you mentioned a clogging class. For the sake of jurors or any of us who may not understand clogging, will you explain what that is?
So clogging is a fast-paced style of dance, and you wear clogging shoes that are similar to a tap shoe. It has 2 taps and it creates loud sounds and also different rhythm steps.
And did you say you attended the class with her or you teach the clogging class?
I was the instructor of the class.
To the best that you can you recall what time frame was it that Tammy was attending that class?
It was the end of August, early September until the time of her death in October 2019.
How often was the class held?
It was every week, a 60-minute class once a week.
Did she attend regularly?
Yes, every class.
How would you describe clogging overall? Would it be low intensity, medium intensity, high intensity? Where would you put it?
I would say medium intensity because you're still getting that cardio and getting your heart rate up.
And when students are in the class, do you have the opportunity to observe them?
Yes, I do.
How often do you recall being able to see Tammy in class while she was clogging?
The whole time I'm observing all of the students, making sure there's no falling behind, that they're able to keep up with the steps that I'm teaching. And so I am constantly watching the students that way.
From your recollection, do you ever recall her falling behind in class?
No,
Do you ever recall any issues with her getting tired?
no,
Any issues at all that you recall with her ability to perform the clogging and keep up with the class?
no.
Now, with respect to any other activities, did you have any other activities that you were involved with, Tammy?
I did.
What were those?
So I attended a high fitness class in St. Anthony and I stood right next to Tammy in that class. And that was my first time going. I was not the instructor at the time. I was just a participant and I stood right next to Tammy in that class.
And for the jury's sake, will you just kind of elaborate, what did you do in high fitness class?
So high fitness class is very high intensity. You're doing burpees, a lot of jumping jacks, explosive movements to really get the heart rate up.
And you said you were standing next to her in class?
Yes, I was.
How often was that class held?
2 times a week,
How long was each class?
60-minute class.
Did Tammy, as you recall, attend that regularly?
Yes.
What time frame do you recall attending that class with Tammy relative to her death?
It was about late September of 2019.
And what did you observe, if anything, about Tammy's performance in that class?
Nothing like, so I observed that she was able to keep up in that class and was doing those high intensity moves like the burpees and things like that. And she was able to keep up with that class as well.
And just as a comparison, how different was high fitness than clogging in terms of intensity?
So high fitness is very high intensity. Clogging is still that cardio workout, getting your heart rate up. But as far as like the up and down movements, clogging, we're still moving at a fast pace. And
Thank you. So just based upon your personal observations overall with what you saw in Tammy in those classes and the interactions at school, let me withdraw that and go back. With respect to your interactions at school and at work, did you have any occasion to observe anything that would give you clues about Tammy's health?
no,
So did you withdraw based upon what you observed in clogging and in high fitness? Did you ever see anything that would give you any questions or concerns about how healthy she was?
no,
Did you ever see anything about her struggling or not keeping up?
no, not at all.
Did she ever express any concerns about how she was feeling?
No,
And at these classes, did you talk to her regularly?
I did. Yes.
Thank you, Your Honor. I have no further questions.
All right, thank you.
Good morning.
Morning.
Would you tell me, again, when did these clogging classes start?
It was the end of August, early September, and they ran every week. And that was the year 2019.
So it was once a week.
Yes,
And let's say you started in September, so there were a total of 5 classes that Tammy attended before she passed away. Would that be fair?
yeah, correct.
5 classes.
Yes.
Okay. And the same thing for the other activity, the high intensity. She only went to one of those though, right?
I could tell she went to more of those. I just attended the one class for my first time.
Well, you don't know whether she attended more. You only saw her at one of those high intensity classes. Isn't that true?
So yes, I did see her.
Okay.
And
Now, I don't want to disparage anybody, but would you describe Tammy's figure as being a body of someone who was extremely fit?
I would say she was a very fit woman.
You'd say she was a very fit woman. Okay.
I would.
Now, you know her daughter Emma, right?
Correct.
And her daughter Emma went to the one high intensity class with her as well, right?
Correct.
And that's the only time you saw Emma and Tammy at the high intensity class that one time, right?
So Emma was a participant as well in my clogging class.
And I'm going to get to that. Emma would stand with her mother at the back of the clogging class and participate in that as well in the very back of the room, right?
Right.
Right. And how many people were in this clogging class?
There were about 7 total.
Okay. And again, if I understand, the clogging classes were twice a week and about the same time, September until Tammy passed in October, right?
Correct. The clogging class was once a week.
Oh, the clogging was once a week? Oh, I'm sorry. I had it down for twice. It was only
The
once a
high
week.
fitness class was twice a week.
Oh, but the high fitness, you only saw her there once. The clogging, you saw her for all 6,
Yes.
5 or 6 of the classes she attended that time, right?
Yes.
And her daughter Emma was there right next to her the whole time, correct?
Correct.
So if there were any issues, you're in the front of the class. If there were any issues with her mother, Emma would probably be the best judge of whether there were issues with her mother and her activity and participation level. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
Okay. Now you said you worked at the school. You worked in the cafeteria or the food service portion of the school.
Yes.
Tammy was a librarian. You also know that Emma was teaching at that school as well, right?
Right.
And it was frequent in her usual practice for Emma and her mother to get together every time they had an opportunity to do so, right?
Objection, Your Honor, that assumes facts, not evidence.
Sustain.
Are you aware that whenever there was any free time during the school hours, that it was always Emma and her mother who would spend the majority of the time together?
Yes.
All right, nothing else, Judge. Thank you.
All right. Can you recross?
Just a couple of questions, if I may, Your Honor.
Very well. I'm sorry, redirect, Mr. Wixom.
Which may, Judge. Ma'am, just very quickly, regardless of the cross-examination. does-
Judge, I'm going to object.
That's argumentative
Yeah, fair enough.
question.
With respect to the questions that you were just asked, is there any doubt that you have in your assessment of watching Tammy in clogging class and her performance?
There's no doubt. No.
So you are confident in what you've told the
Asked and
jury?
answered.
Overruled.
You are confident in what you've told the jury about your personal observations about Tammy and how she performed?
Yes.
Thank you. I have no further questions, Your Honor.
All right, thank you. Any need to recall the witness from the state or the defense?
Not from the defense, Judge.
Not from the state, Your Honor.
All right, thank you. That concludes your testimony in the trial. Thank you for appearing. You may go ahead and step down from the witness box. And you're released from any subpoena. All right, the state can call its next witness.
Judge, at this time, the state would call Shanna Miller.
or affirm the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
All right, the witness has been sworn. I'll just have a few questions before we begin with the examination. This trial, Ms. Miller, has been live streamed and publicly available for viewing. Have you observed or watched any of the trial testimony that's taken place?
No, I have not, Your Honor.
All right, thank you. Have you discussed with anyone else their testimony they've given in the trial?
No, I have not.
All right, thank you for that affirmation. Mr. Wixom, you may proceed with direct.
Thank you. Good morning, ma'am. Will you please state your full name for the record?
Shanna Miller,
Will you spell it, please?
SHANNAMILLER,
And where do you live?
St. Anthony, Idaho.
And what do you do for work?
I have been retired for the last year and a half, but previous to that, I was a school teacher for 34 years.
What school did you teach at?
Central Elementary in Sugar City.
During your time teaching at Central Elementary, do you recall working with Tammy Daybell?
Yes, I do.
And did you become aware back in October of 2019 that she'd passed?
Yes.
Could you explain to the jury how often and in what way did you interact with Tammy at your work?
I was actually on the committee that interviewed Tammy for a job position at our school back in the spring of, I believe it was 2017. She was hired to be our computer specialist and our librarian. She also helped out with the lunch count, checking the kids in as they went to lunch. So I was her colleague after we hired her. I also attended a high fitness class in St. Anthony with her and her daughter twice a week.
And what was that high fitness class?
It's called High Fit. It's a high intensity workout that lasts an hour. It consists of burpees, jumping jacks, lunges, squats, planks, all set to music.
And how often did you attend that class?
At the time, I was attending twice a week.
Do you recall how often at the time, prior to her death, Tammy was attending the class?
Yes, she and her daughter started attending, I believe it was the spring of 2018, and they attended up until her death in October of 2019.
Were they regular attenders?
Yes.
When they came to class, did you have opportunity to interact with Tammy or observe how she was doing?
Yes, I was on the back row, so all I needed to do was look over. Yeah, I had opportunity to observe them.
Would you feel like you had a good vantage point typically?
Yes.
What observations, if any, did you make about Tammy's performance in that class?
Well, it is a very rigorous exercise that's highly aerobic. And at first, it's hard for anyone that's not in great shape to be able to have the stamina and the strength to be able to complete it. And at first, they weren't able to complete all of the exercises are set to, songs. So they weren't maybe able to do all of the exercises completely correct or finish them, accordingly at first. But as time went on, I would say after the first, I don't know, several weeks, maybe a couple months, they were able to complete the workout.
With respect to, let's narrow it down to the last few months prior to Tammy's death,
Okay.
were there ever times that you saw Tammy lag behind?
No,
Did she ever stop or take breaks?
no,
Any indication to you that she wasn't keeping up in the class?
no,
Are you confident that based upon your interaction with her at the class and what you could see, that you would have observed that had she fallen back?
no.
You're not confident or?
Oh, sorry. Can you rephrase that question?
Sure.
That's a long one.
Any reason for you to think that you weren't able to have a good observation of Tammy and assess how she was doing?
Yes, I was I was able to, yes, I would be able to be confident and to say that, yes, I did.
And what about with work? I didn't ask. How often did you interact with Tammy at work?
I would see her probably, I would say every day, sometimes several times a day. Uh, and when I took my kids to library, that was once a week. Computer lab was once a week, maybe twice a week. Can't remember for sure. And then every day as I took my kids into the lunchroom, she'd check the kids off as they came through the lunch line. I would see her then.
Based on observations at work, do you feel like you were able to make any observations about her health or fitness from what you saw at work?
I would say from the time that she started the fitness class, her confidence level in herself, I think her overall image of herself, I think it had improved. She looked like she was in great health and in great shape to me.
And in terms of observing her doing her daily duties at work, did you ever see her get tired or worn out?
No,
What was your reaction when you first learned of Tammy's death?
complete shock
Why is that?
because hours before that, I had seen her at work and she was happy, healthy, conversing with the kids as they, guess the last time I would have seen her would have been, the kids were going through the lunch line. She was conversing with them, complimenting them, smiling. She seemed perfectly healthy to me.
Thank you. Your Honor, I have no further questions at this time.
All right, thank you, Mr. Wixom. Cross-examination.
Morning, Ms. Miller.
Good morning.
So your testimony is that you first started with the interview process of Tammy in the spring of 2017. Is that right?
Mhm.
That means that she would have started her first year in the fall to start as her job as a librarian. Would that be fair?
Of 2017?
Of fall of 2017.
Yes, I
So-
believe that is correct.
Okay. You're not sure though. It could be 2018.
Well, if I did the math correctly, she had worked there she was in her second year of teaching. The second year would have been 2019 to 2020. So that would have been 2018 to 2019, the year that she started working. Yeah,
So 2018, right?
yes, it was
Yeah.
2000.
So when you say 2017, you really didn't know Tammy until the spring when you met her of 2018, correct?
I would have to do the math on that.
Okay.
Still not convinced.
Well, you know, she was in her second year of teaching at the school when she passed, right?
Mhm.
And in the first year of school, that's sort of a probationary period, right?
Yes. Mhm.
And in that probationary period is when they give you the basic benefits, the start benefits that you have to go through as part of your probation, things like life insurance and medical care and all of that. You're given that minimum plan. And then after the first year, that's when you choose to upgrade to add the additional life insurance and death benefits and all that other stuff, right?
Objection, Your Honor, this is outside the scope.
Overruled.
That's when that second year is when you start adding and increasing all of those additional benefits because you've put a year in as your probationary period, right? Ma'am?
I don't know.
Okay,
I
well,
can't
you
answer
worked
that.
there.
Yes, I did for 34 years. That was a long time ago
Okay,
when I
so for
first
30
started working there.
So you're
But
not.
I didn't up my death benefit my second year.
Okay. I'm sorry, you what?
I did not up my death benefit the second year that I
Okay.
taught.
But that's not an uncommon thing to up your death benefit in the second year after you get that eligibility, right?
I couldn't answer that.
Right. And you said 2017, but really it was 2018 when you first met her in the spring, wasn't it?
I don't know.
Okay. And we had a previous witness who talked about these high intensity classes. And you're telling me that these high intensity classes started when?
They started attending when they started attending or when they started?
When they started?
The instructor's been teaching those high intensity classes for the last at least 6 years, and she was teaching Zumba before that.
Okay. So your testimony is that you met Tammy in the spring of 2018. And ironically enough, that was exactly the time she started these high intensity dance classes at the same time, right? And that's how you became such fast friends, right?
No, I became friends before that at school.
Okay. With Tammy at school?
Mhm.
She wasn't working there.
Well, shortly after she started working there, obviously we became friends.
Okay, and she started working there in the fall of 2018 as the full-time librarian, didn't she?
Yes.
Okay. So isn't it true, ma'am, that the high-intensity classes started in September of 2019?
But they started in 2019? No, no, she had been attending for at least 9 months prior to that.
Okay,
Actually, it was more like a year and a half because she had started, I remember she'd started in the spring because her and her daughter had expressed that they wanted to get in shape for a 5K. And
okay,
so some of my coworkers said, well, you should come to High Fit and
okay.
that will help you get in shape. And that would have been in the spring. So she did it that spring and then that fall, then the following spring.
Okay, so in the spring of 2008, when you first met her, uh, basically what happened in the very first spring when you were interviewing her, she signs up for high fitness. She decides she's going to do a 5K. She's going to do all of these
No,
things.
no,
Ma'am,
we
let me
hired
finish
her.
My question,
Well,
please.
Mr. Pryor, problem is it's argumentative, so just ask a question, please.
I didn't hear an objection from the prosecutor, Judge.
I know, but in fairness, it's in the long line of argument that she started responding. So just please go with questioning on cross.
And you would agree with me that Emma was there for all of the times that Tammy was involved in that class. Would that be fair?
I believe so.
Okay, so Emma was standing next to her the entire time, right?
They worked out next to each other.
Okay. And did you watch Tammy the entire time that you participated in these high intensity exercises?
Off and on. I mean, you're always looking around, seeing, what everybody else is doing, if they're following the instructor.
And how many participants were in these high intensity exercise classes?
Uh, It would depend. There could be as few as 15, as many as upwards of 24 to 30, depending on the night.
Do you know Kelsey Harris?
Yes,
Okay. Friend of yours?
no. Well, coworker, colleague,
Okay. You don't go to any classes with her, right?
no.
Okay. So how would you evaluate, if you were to make a determination, would you say that Tammy Daybell was very fit?
Yes,
So she had a low body fat, she had a petite figure, is that what you're telling me?
you don't have to have a low body fat or a petite figure to be highly fit. But what I observed is that she had the stamina from the time she started to the fall that she passed. She had the stamina to be able to complete those rigorous
Okay,
workouts.
okay. Judge, I have nothing else. Thank you.
Redirect, Mr. Wixom.
No, Your Honor, we would excuse the witness.
All right, that concludes your testimony. Thank you very much for appearing today. Released from any subpoena, and I'll ask the state if they've got another witness to call.
We do, Your Honor. At this time, we would call Jennifer Geisler.
I'm sorry, Judge, I missed the name.
Jennifer Geisler.
Swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give is the truth.
All right, good morning, Ms. Geisler. Before we commence with examination by the state, I just have a few questions now that you've been placed under oath. This trial has been broadcast on a court YouTube channel and publicly available to view. Have you observed any of the trial testimony since the case began?
I have not.
Okay, have you discussed with anyone else the testimony they've been in the trial?
I have not.
Okay, thanks for your responses. Mr. Wixom, you can inquire on direct.
Thank you, Your Honor. Ma'am, will you please state your full name for the record?
Yep. Jennifer C. Geisler,
Will you please spell that?
JENNIFERCGEISLER.
Thank you. And where do you live?
I live in St. Anthony.
And where do you work?
I work at Central Elementary.
What is your job there?
I'm a first grade teacher. Yep, first grade.
How long have you worked at the elementary school?
It's been about 26 years.
I want to draw your attention back to the summer and fall of 2019. Do you remember working with Tammy Daybell?
I do.
Can you explain to the jury, well, first, did you have interactions with Tammy at work?
I did. She was our librarian.
Could you please explain to the jury how often or frequently you interacted with her and what capacity?
I would probably see her at least every day going back and forth in the hall. I took my class to library once a week. And so it's stop and talk. Frequently, probably about 2 to 3 times a week, I ate lunch with her. Our first grade team eats lunch first and we go into the lunchroom, our teacher workroom, and Tammy usually would come in and eat with us.
How would you describe your relationship with Tammy just overall?
Just friends. We were good friends.
And while working with her, what did you observe about her personality overall?
She was just super friendly, always bubbly, happy. She was a person that you would like to be around.
Was that the case in the late summer, early fall of 2019 before she passed?
Yeah. Yep.
And did you ever do anything or associate with Tammy outside of school?
I did.
What did you do?
So she came to, it was a high fitness class that we had up in St. Anthony, and twice a week I had invited her and Emma to come up and give it a try. And they came up and joined us. It's about an hour twice a week at night. And so they came up and exercised with us.
Was she regularly attending the class after you invited her?
She did,
Did she come both classes each week?
most often.
When she was in class with you, did you have any opportunity to observe how she was doing in class?
So most of the time I was up in the front row. Tammy and Emma are in the back row. So I didn't get to see them through every song, but some of the songs you turn around and you can see. They were always funny and giggly back there and would sometimes add their own moves into the songs with them. And then at the end of the class, my sister and I go back and we kind of check everybody out. I punch her base cards. And so as they come through, could talk to Tammy and Emma as they came through.
Did Tammy ever make any comments about how she was doing in class?
She loved it. She always thought it was just fun.
Did you observe how she was performing? Did she seem to be keeping up in the class?
Yeah, she did. Like when they come through, usually when you finish, you're pretty sweaty. And as she came through, she was as sweaty as everybody else.
Do you recall ever seeing any times where she had to take a break or got short of breath, anything like that?
Not that I recall.
When was the last time that you personally recall interacting with Tammy?
It was the Friday right before she died.
What was that interaction that you had with her?
I ate lunch across the table from her.
And what observations, if any, did you have of her health that day?
Just like a normal day. She was healthy, happy, talkative. She was sitting by her son, Seth. He was substituting that day. And just a normal day.
What was your reaction when you had learned that she passed?
I was super surprised. that she had passed
Why?
because she was just so healthy just the day before. And I was just talking to her.
And then last question, based upon what you observed, do you think you had enough opportunity to see Tammy in class and how her performance to have a fair assessment of how she was doing?
I do.
So had she fallen back or gotten tired, do you believe that you would have seen that?
Yeah.
How far away were you from her in the class typically?
You know, I'm terrible at distance. I was like, she's probably 3 rows back. And it's just in their small little elementary gym.
Do you feel like you could see her well?
Yes.
Thank you. Your Honor, I have no further questions.
All right. Cross-examination.
Good morning.
Good morning.
About what time did Tammy and Emma sign up for the Zumba class?
Mhm. I don't remember the exact day.
Okay. Do you remember talking to Officer Mattingly about that?
I do.
Okay. Would it surprise you to learn that you told Officer Mattingly that Tammy had been in the Zumba class for around 4 months?
Yes, I think I did.
About what you said?
That's about what I said.
Okay. You also told Officer Mattingly that you didn't know whether Tammy was doing the high workout or the low intensity workout. Remember telling him that as well?
I remember telling him I didn't get to see her with every song, but as I turned, you could look back that way.
Okay. And you were in the front row, right?
I am.
And Tammy was in the back row.
Yes.
So in order to see Tammy, you would have had to purposely turn around and observe her, right?
Yes.
And to your knowledge, Emma was at every single one of the classes with her mother, correct?
Yes. She would come with her mom.
Now, you first met Tammy when?
When she started teaching or was our librarian hired at our school.
2018?
If that's when, I can't remember when she was hired.
Okay. You mentioned that you guys were such good friends. You never went over to her house, though, did you?
No, just like school friends.
Oh, school friends. So you would just talk periodically during the day, right?
Right.
And teachers are busy. They have to take care of their students, correct?
Yep. We have our downtime at lunch.
Right. But the reality is that most of the downtime at lunch, it was Tammy and Emma who were spending their time together at almost every lunch. Do you recall that?
So Tammy would come in and sit with us to eat. Emma taught 3rd grade, and so her lunch was a little bit later in the day.
But they would spend time during the lunch hour together, right?
Possibly, yes.
Yeah. Okay. Judge, I don't have anything else. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Redirect?
May I have just a couple of questions?
Yes.
Thank you. Ma'am, just to be clear, are Zumba and high fitness class the same class?
So that's, I was checking because I had talked to him before about Zumba. When I had asked Chrissy just before, how long have we been doing high fit? And she had clarified that we've been doing it for 6 years. And so it was more high fit when Emma and Tammy started coming. High fit is more intense. You got lots of jumping jacks and burpees and tuck jumps, and it's a lot more physical workout than Zumba. Zumba's a little bit more dancey.
I think you just were asked some questions about eating lunch with Tammy. Is that a yes?
Yes.
Okay. Did you have the opportunity to observe what kinds of food she ate or how healthy her eating was?
Yes, because if I followed her through the lunch line, I always commented she took all the vegetables. I would usually follow through and skip the vegetables and take the cookies and stuff. And I had commented to her that she eats super healthy. I wish I ate as healthy as she did.
During that last several months before she passed, did you ever observe her to gain or lose any weight?
Judge, this is going beyond scope.
Is sustained.
No further questions, Your Honor.
All right. Any recross?
If the court tells me where they're going to allow me to go on recross, I will.
Just on those very first comments about her testimony.
So I also must have misunderstood. So the high fitness is one class, correct?
Yes.
When did Tammy start doing the high fitness class?
So it was the same. I had just mentioned before when they had asked me that I had said it was Zumba. We had started out doing Zumba a long time ago, and then our teacher, Chrissy, has turned it into a high fit class.
Oh, so it was all the same
So it's
class.
all been high, not all the same. It went from Zumba, right? And then we stopped and then went into a high fit
Okay,
and had been doing that for a while before Tammy and Emma joined in.
so
So instead of Zumba, they were doing a high fit.
that was about 4 months of that, right?
Yes, and probably longer. I don't remember, recall exactly when they started.
So it could have been a little longer, could have been a little shorter.
Not shorter, but it could have been longer
Oh, how do you know that it wasn't shorter?
because I knew they were coming longer than 4 months.
Okay. Okay, Judge, that's all I have. Thank you.
All right, thank you. That concludes the testimony then of this witness. Is she permitted to be released from any subpoena?
From the
Yep.
defense, yes.
From the
Okay.
state as well, Your Honor.
All right, you're released from your subpoena. Thank you for appearing, and you may be excused.
Ingrid. Ingrid.
You want to get into another witness, or do you want to take the lunch recess?
Your Honor, the next witness will be a little more lengthy, and so I think we would probably end up at a weird stopping point. So we would request that we maybe just break 10 minutes early.
Okay,
That would be my request as well, Judge.
I'm fine with that. We'll go ahead and take the noon recess. We'll go ahead and be in recess, and let's try and resume with additional testimony right at 1 o'clock.
All right, wait.
And I did just one thing. The other one I emailed you just has one change.
Okay, folks, thank you very much.
So I got into Google and searched for Chad Daybell. When I typed his name in, an obituary popped up for a Tammy Daybell.
She's clearly dead. Yeah, she's not even frozen.
The prophet choking back tears in court, but will his emotion impact the jury? And some new developments in the death of Chad Robinson as police say her blood was not inside Maxwell Anderson's house. Plus, we're breaking down Tuesday's big hearing for OnlyFans model Courtney Clenny as her attorneys join us on the show live. It's all coming up next for you, plus much more right here on Opening Statements. Good Wednesday morning to you, and thanks for waking up with us here on Opening Statements. I'm your host, Julie Grant. Are you ready for some coffee and court? We sure are. We've got a great show planned for you this morning. Going to get you all primed and ready to go for the cases we're covering at trial and the ones that just have us talking in the world of true crime. So right now, why don't you go ahead and grab that cup of coffee, because it's time for my opening statement. Whose blood is it? Whose blood was left on the bedding and on the walls leading to the basement in Maxwell Anderson's home? That's the question investigators at the Milwaukee Sheriff's Department are trying to answer this morning. Prosecutors say that lab testing on the blood showed them that it doesn't belong to Sade Robinson. So what does this mean for the case? In my opinion, I'll tell you, my friends, it doesn't diminish the murder case against that guy one bit. Let's remember, not all murders, rather, is what I want to say. Not all murders are bloody, right? Think about it. We see this all the time on court TV. People can be strangled to death. People can be suffocated to death, and blood wouldn't be found at a location where the murder happened, right? Also, the dismemberment could have occurred near where her remains were found. It didn't necessarily have to happen at the house. Let's bear that in mind if he did what police say he did. I read through that criminal complaint thoroughly. The case against Maxwell Anderson is very strong. Police have video evidence of him, cell phone evidence of him, eyewitnesses who saw him. They have all of this information to prove that he is the guy who murdered beautiful Sade Robinson. And then they say he dismembered her and set fire to her car to cover it up. So now the question really becomes this morning, do investigators think the blood that doesn't belong to Sade is evidence of a crime against somebody else? Where will that blood lead them? I mean, let's think about it. Who lives in a house with blood on the walls? Really? Who does that? How did it get there? And what I really want to know is what is down in that guy's basement? Because I've read some local reporting that this guy had a sex dungeon in his basement. Police have not publicly confirmed that, but it certainly makes me wonder. I'm sure it does you too. I hope and pray that if there were other people harmed in that home, that police will be able to solve their cases too, just as I believe they have already solved Sade Robinson's murder. May she get justice, the justice that she deserves, and may her family find some bit of comfort in knowing how many people care about Sade Robinson and about seeing her killer punished to the fullest extent of the law. That's my opening statement on this Wednesday morning. Let me know if you like it. Right now, I want to give you what's on your daily docket.
And you were indicted by Granger. Okay, you're aware he was beaten up by Brian Calm Albert. I mean, we're all in on the same joke, right? My tail leg was cracked and jaw was pulverized.
All right, my friends, here's a look at some of the cases we're following for you today on Court TV. In Massachusetts, we've got jury selection starting up at 9 a.m. in the case against defendant Karen Reed. This is over the murder of Boston police officer John O'Keefe. The court is looking to seat one more juror, and then they have a complete panel. So we're there. We'll let you know if it happens. In Ohio, we've got Caitlin Coons and her boyfriend. These two are due in court at 9 a.m. They've got a pretrial hearing in their murder case over the death of her boyfriend's mother. Also happening in Ohio, defendant Lisa Necrelli. You remember her. She's the woman accused of impersonating a child services agent to try to lure a little boy away from his home. Well, that lady's going to be in court at 10 a.m., and we're going to be following that one for you as well. Now to some breaking news this morning. In the Scott Peterson case, as the district attorney in Stanislaus County, California, is seeking to stop new DNA testing. So you've heard that the LA Innocence Project wants to test more than a dozen items of evidence. This is in an attempt to try to exonerate Peterson, who appeared in court last month. But the district attorney says the evidence has either already been tested, already been litigated over, or is unrelated, or the burden has not been met in order to rise to the standard to retest them. Now, Peterson is serving life in prison for the murders of his wife, Lacey, and his unborn son, Connor. The LA Innocence Project recently took up this case. That is a local group, not affiliated with the National Innocence Project. And they say that Peterson's rights were violated. That's their contention. And we have to wait to hear what a judge has to say about the district attorney's office brand new filing. So that's the latest in the Peterson case. We'll share more developments on that as they come in. We've got to turn now back to the death of Sade Robinson and the major news that her blood has not been found in suspect Maxwell Anderson's home.
The preliminary DNA analysis supports the conclusion that there is no support for inclusion of Robinson's DNA in the blood or swabs that have been tested.
For more on these developments and the charges with Maxwell Anderson, we've got the intentional homicide charge, mutilating a corpse, all of that. This guy's facing some serious business, and we want to get the latest from Milwaukee this morning. We're so pleased to have joining us Scripps News Milwaukee correspondent Miriam Makar. She's standing by with the very latest for us. Miriam, good morning to you.
Good morning, Julie. Just like you mentioned, the new evidence added to the criminal complaint shows that the blood found was not Robinson's, the one that was found in Anderson's walls leading to the basement. And that's really the biggest turn in this case so far.
Yeah, Miriam, when it's not hers, I think so many people went, oh my gosh, is this the right guy? Looking at the evidence, though, it was very clear to me that police have the right guy. Eyewitness testimony, video evidence, his face. There is a person who said they saw him light that fire, the fire that burned her car, and run away from it. They've got his face on video. They've got all of the different pieces of the text messaging. And something that I was unaware of until I looked at the criminal complaint was that Sade Robinson had Life 360 as well on her phone. And one of her friends brought that to police's attention. I understand they're going through that as well, aren't they?
That's absolutely right, Julie. The case against Anderson right now is fairly robust. So even though we don't know who that blood belongs to, this jury trial is still moving forward. On Monday, he waived his right to a preliminary hearing and pleaded not guilty to all of the charges he's facing against Sade Robinson, which again is first-degree intentional homicide, mutilating a corpse, and arson. So next up is a scheduling conference set on May 16th, where, like you mentioned, that jury trial against him is still moving forward.
Right, Miriam. Miriam, tell us, as you're on the ground there and you're talking to different people, we know this has shaken the Milwaukee community where you are. Sade Robinson's family devastated. It's painful to watch them and hear them and what they're saying going through this. I can't even imagine anything worse for parents to have to bury their child in this brutal way after she died. What are they saying? How are they handling this? We've heard them speak out, but it was some days ago. What's the latest that the family has shared with you all, Miriam?
As you mentioned, this has been an extremely traumatic few weeks for her loved ones, and as well as the community here who's really been shaken up by this. A vigil was just held on Friday where so many people showed up in support, and the family actually announced their plans to start a nonprofit in her honor called Sade's Voice. And they're hoping that nonprofit will help families of missing Black and brown women get some closure and just assistance during these nightmare situations. And of course, as we've mentioned before, her friends and family are still out, boots on the ground, on the shores of Lake Michigan, searching for the rest of the 19-year-old's remains. They say they won't be able to come to peace with any of this until she's properly laid to rest. So just a lot of grief still circulating the community here.
I appreciate that point as well, Miriam, about the search efforts still continuing this morning. We're certainly mindful of that. Miriam Makar, Scripps News Milwaukee correspondent, thank you kindly for joining us this morning on Opening Statements. We'll see you soon. I have a very special guest I want to bring in now, retired NYPD Sergeant, the host of the podcast True Crime with the Sarge, Joe Giacalone, is standing by in New York this morning. Joe, good morning to you. And I've got to say, when I read the news about the blood on the walls, on the comforter, not belonging to Sade Robinson, belonging to someone else, all I could think about was what you said when you were on this show 2 days ago, and you said, you know, I'm wondering if this was the first time this guy allegedly did something like this. Your thoughts when you heard the confirmation from police?
Yeah, no, so this is another little interesting wrinkle, and this often happens in investigations where you're investigating one thing and then all of a sudden something else pops up on you that you have to answer out. So they have to answer out whose blood this is, and we don't know the exact amount of blood, but from, you know, what they're talking about, it should be enough significance that they can see it on the way down, going down the walls. So that's an important aspect. So they need to find exactly where this event happened, and I'm leaning more towards her vehicle. Just because, I mean, her vehicle's parked at this location for, I think it was 3 hours and 19 minutes, according to the affidavit. So this could have all have occurred inside that car, and another reason why it had to be burned, because there was a lot of evidence in that car. So I think that's where investigators will be pulling that thing apart, taking it right down to the metals or whatever is left over, and see if they can get any other types of forensics from there.
Exactly, Sarge. Exactly. I'm with you. That's got to be the site where the dismemberment occurred. It just has to be. And looking at the affidavit of probable cause, there was an eyewitness who just happened to be walking down the street who saw him running from the car. This person told police after he lit it on fire. And then there's some video evidence of his face in the same clothing that was described, by this witness, also captured on video. This guy, he's got major legal problems on this case, and I'm thinking there are going to be more problems coming down the pike for him. Sarge, I want to ask you about the sex dungeon allegations. So one of the local stations there in Milwaukee, WISN 12 News, learned from law enforcement sources that this guy had what's described as a sex dungeon in his basement. Remember, the blood is on the walls leading to the basement. Apparently they talked to a woman as well who says she knows Anderson, who claims, and this is her words, quoting directly here, quote, "I got a little bit of a tour," and he was like, "Do you want to see the basement?" I was like, "No, I'm okay." He's like, "It's creepy down there." I was like, "No, it's okay." Do you think that the sex dungeon, if it does exist in his home, could have been perhaps a factor here in why Sade Robinson was killed?
Well, it could be, right? So we don't know exactly what transpires down in that basement or not, but the blood that goes down there, you can think about some other horrific things. And if you remember, I also mentioned on Monday, too, that they need to be looking at companion cases. And I think, recovering of the rest of the remains will tell the entire story, because it could tell us exactly what the cause of death was. Was it a gunshot wound to the head? And then and then that's the reason why that part is missing. Because when you start looking at other open cases that are happening in this area, firearm is the #1 use, and there's over 53 open homicides in Milwaukee over the last couple of years of females who were shot. So the issue that comes down to is if they can find that, recover ballistics, and maybe then match it up to other things. Right now, it's a stretch to we're just speculating on that part, but you have to think about these things, because if there's no forensic evidence in the house, it had to had to happen somewhere else. It's as simple as that.
Right, Sarge. Yeah, perhaps the killing and the dismemberment of Sade Robinson happened in a place other than the house. We know they went to the house, but that's a really great point. And I wonder, last question for you, please, Sarge. Do you think the fact that the dismemberment has occurred and officials still haven't found all of her remains might stifle investigators' ability to know exactly how she was killed?
Yes, it's going to, we need to get the complete part of her body, every piece of it, because it will tell the entire story, right? Because the medical examiner will be able to tell us exactly what the cause and the manner of death was. We know the manner of death is going to be homicide, but the cause of death is an important aspect, right? Whether it's strangulation, asphyxia, gunshot wounds, stab wounds, or what have you, because then you have to need to look for the murder weapons. You also need to look for the weapons or the devices that were used to dismember the body. If you read the affidavit, it talks about a lot of chopping and a lot of different that. So we're looking maybe for axes. There's a saw that they mentioned in the story too. So there is a bag of evidence somewhere. And remember, the clothes he was wearing doing this have to be found too, because this is the reason why I'm thinking it's the car, because you can go from the car into the house, change, and go.
Right. I think you're spot on, Sarge. Sergeant Joe Giacalone, check out his podcast, True Crime with the Sarge. It's excellent. Really appreciate you coming on the show to talk with us this morning. Take care. See you soon. When we come back, here's what we have next here on Opening Statements.
Free Palestine. Israel. Zionism. Please say it. One time.
Could you do me one quick favor?
Could Alec Baldwin be in some more trouble after that altercation with the protester? And attorneys for OnlyFans mom